My name is Aaron Hunzinger. I'm Did It. I am the builder of the GMC Hurricane. So I first got into cars very similar to the same way every other kid did. Matchbox cars, building models. But that's really kind of where it turned to the custom stuff. I would take model cars and parts from one car onto another and whatnot. And before I even had my license, I had a subscription to Mini Truckin' Magazine and was a diehard fan of that. Kind of came from the mini truck scene. My first truck was a GMC S15, which is 1989. It was the year before they called it the GMC Sonoma. I had that for a little while, blew it up, and then I got a 95 Chevy S10 with a 2.2 4-cylinder and a 5-speed. Beat the shit out of that truck. Yeah, I definitely learned my appreciation for vehicles with that truck. I started modifying it, lowered it 3 different times, ended up putting Beltec suspension on it and a tonneau cover and a Lexan rear window, shaved roll pan, which really kind of got me into the mini truck scene pretty diehard. As far as family or friends that had interested me in cars or that helped kind of provoke that, I mean, my family wasn't really, you know, per se into cars. My dad kind of taught me to respect whatever it is that I owned or whatever it is that I was working for. But a lot of the support from the, you know, from my friends and stuff is really what got me kind of steady down that path. I had a lot of friends, you know, my Blanchard crew from back in the day in Waukegan. I would hang out with a group of guys back then. When I bagged my Chevy Blazer, I still have it actually, a 2001 Chevy Blazer. And when I bought that truck, I had all the air ride suspension just waiting for it. And 3 days after I bought it, I had the car on jack stands, the front end torn out of it, and putting a full airlift suspension setup on the car. C-notched the rear frame, put a drive shaft tunnel in it, was able to keep the rear seat, and not quite laying frame, but it's right about there. It's about a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch off the ground. Got it as low as I possibly could, keeping the rear seats in the car. But yeah, a lot of my friends back then just, you know, solidified my whole car, you know, automotive enthusiast lifestyle. You know, we all kind of supported each other. Basically, the reason everybody's here, the reason you're gonna watch this video is because of the GMC Hurricane. Really, I'll break it down to you from the day that it all started. A couple years back, my dad passed away. Prior to that, I was driving a 2008 Chevy HHR Panel. And my dad loved it. I still drive it, it's my daily driver. My dad loved that car. Every time he would go up north for the weekend or something, he would always want to take my car. So it came time to where he just decided that he wanted to get his own HHR. And my mom took a trip to Florida. They rented a red one. So his whole thing was, I want to get this, you know, this crystal red Chevy HHR, you know, and then I'll just be my daily driver. So he always drove GMC trucks and Suburbans, and he's a diehard GMC guy. So this would have been like the first non-GMC car that he would have had since he owned a Buick LeSabre back in the day. So anyways, one thing led to another. My dad passed away, and, you know, just, you know, life was, you know, I had lost my dad. So I was, you know, I'm not going to say I was, you know, depressed or anything like that, but I was, you know, I was caught up in my emotions and just trying to, you know, solidify memories and things to talk to my kids about. And my dad always taught me to, you know, to finish what I started and to always try and do my best and to not be afraid to show people what I'm capable of doing, to not brag about it, to not be arrogant, to not be cocky, but to be confident. So that's kind of how I've always been raised. So I have about a 40-mile commute to work every day. And it's like, you know what, I'm gonna buy myself another car, something that I can, you know, enjoy my drive to and from work. And I love the HHR. I started thinking about buying another base model, a red one. It was like, I don't, you know, I have a panel, I don't need a base model. So I started looking at the SS, and I found 3 different cars that kind of fit the bill. It had to be a 2010, had to be a G85 option, which is the limited slip differential up front. So it had to be a 2010, had to be a G85, it had to have the RPD, which came in a 2010. Had to have dual GMPP front seats. It had to fit a certain bill. So I found 3 cars, and one of them was in Michigan, one was in Florida, and one was in Chicago. The one that was in Chicago was this one. It was the red one. It had the highest mileage and just so happened to be the closest one, but it fit the bill. It had everything that I wanted, and it was red. So I bought the car, and the dealership wanted a hell of a lot more than I paid for it. I watched the car for a few months and saw it sitting on the lot. I was following it weekly on the internet and just watching the price drop to a point where I was just gonna go in and buy it. So it got to about $1,000 away from that price, went in, offered them that price. They didn't take it. They called me back the next day, basically told me that they were gonna sell me the car. So got the car for what I wanted it for, and as soon as I brought it home, I mean, the build started right away. I had it for 3 days before I bought my first part, which was the catless downpipe that I bought from Johnny Wynn. Thank you. Ended up buying a couple other parts from him, front mount intercooler, a bunch of other parts. So good dude. But then immediately had the GMPP stage kit put on it, and you know, I just was livening the car up, making it more and more fun. And one thing led to another, and it was just like, you know, this is the color of the car that my dad wanted. You know, I was starting to instill all of the values that he taught me into the car, you know, not necessarily, you know, doing everything top notch, I guess, just doing it myself and taking a lot of pride in my work and trying to do the best that I can, that, you know, my abilities. So one thing led to another, and I was sitting in my garage one day and, you know, kind of looking at the car, thinking about my dad, and I had the emblem from his GMC Suburban sitting on the shelf. And I was like, man, those colors are just so spot on to my car. And I held the emblem in front of the grill and took a picture. It was like that, instantly like that. So it was like, all right, well, I'm gonna turn this thing into a GMC. So I grew up loving the GMC Typhoon and the GMC Cyclones coming from mini trucks. I mean, those trucks are the holy grail. I mean, they still are some of, you know, my absolute favorite dream vehicles. I was actually fortunate enough to drive one of 9 Marlboro Edition GMC Cyclones. So that was pretty cool. So turning it into a GMC, it was like, well, now I have to come up with a name for it. Well, being that it was turbo, you know, I'm already going with a performance thing. You know, the Hurricane just kind of fit the bill, and it didn't even really take much thought, really, for me. I mean, it was like, there's the Typhoon, there's the Cyclone. I'm building an HHR, turning it into a GMC. It's got to be the Hurricane. I mean, it fit the bill. And I couldn't just put a GMC badge on the front. You know, I didn't want it to, you know, I wasn't trying to like up badge it or anything like that. So I dove headfirst into it. You know, I put a custom grill on it. I took I actually went through half a dozen different GMC emblems to find the right one that was the right size that I was able to, heat up and shape to fit the grill that I'd put on there. And I actually removed every single Chevy bow tie from the car. Every single one. I have a standing bet, $100 to anybody who can find a Chevy bow tie on my car in person. You won't find one. So as I was building the car, I was made aware of, the companies out there providing parts, and fell in love with ZZ Performance, and the quality of the parts that they were putting out, and the quality of their employees, and just their customer relationship. It made it very easy for me to be a good customer to them. And one thing led to another, and they got on board with my build and gave me a sponsorship. So I'm in my third year of the car. I've had the car for 3 years now. The first year I had it, I just did a lot of the bolt-on stuff. The second year I had it, I really wanted to start enjoying the car for everything that it was worth. So I put KWV2 coilovers on it. I put the 14.5-inch Brembos on it, put an 1.5-inch rear sway bar, solid bushings, solid motor mounts, angled trans mounts, just did everything I could to just stiffen the car up, and I drove the shit out of the car. So I entered into the River Valley Road Rally, thanks to my buddy Mike Arvai, who was just like, hey man, you gotta sign up for this event. It's the most fun I've ever had in a car. Checked it out, got myself registered, and he was not lying. It was the best thing I've ever done behind the wheel of a car. Met some people and became friends with some people that will be lifelong friends. And after that, my wife and I took the car and we drove out to Tail of the Dragon. And I don't know how, but I was able to convince my wife to come with me on that trip, and she loved it. She had a great time. The car performed excellent out there. The whole time we were there, it performed great. The whole drive out there, driving the Dragon, all that. I made it from North Carolina to the Illinois-Indiana border, and I lost my throwout bearing. When I ran the road rally last year, I had my first variant of a spoiler. Nobody built a spoiler for these cars, so I built one, and I built it out of fiberglass. And it made it through the road rally, but it didn't last to Tail of the Dragon. For whatever reason, it cracked, and so I figured I'm gonna make a new one. Well, I obviously have no experience in fiberglass, so I made one out of metal, and took my time with it. I actually spent 3 months building the spoiler, and one of my good buddies, Joe Hutchcraft, who came with me to the junkyard one day, he's like, the spoiler you're doing, why don't you actually build it on a hatch and then cut it off of the hatch and then bolt it to your car like you're stacking 2 spoons. And it was just like, dude, that's way too simple. Like it can't be that easy. Well, it was that easy, so that's exactly what we did. But I don't know, for anybody who was watching the build, the roll panel was on the car and white for a very long time. The rear hatch was in primer for a long time, but I painted it red with some rattle can at one point to try and cover it up while I was saving my nickels and dimes for some paint. But it's all done. I mean, the car's done. I've now got a full sponsorship from Brum Racing. Nobody else was going to see my vision. Nobody else was going to understand, what a 16-inch spoiler is going to look like on the back of a car that no longer has a bumper, period. Like, my whole thought process was, you look at a Chevy HHR, and that's basically the car that every toddler draws on the back of a placemat with crayons. It's exaggerated fenders, long roof, tiny little windshields, tiny windows, big wheels. And if a little kid draws a spoiler, it's going to be huge, and it's going to have a swooping look on the car, and it's kind of, I guess, a toddler's rendition of a car, I guess. As far as my appreciation and thanks, I mean, obviously, first and foremost, I have to thank my wife for putting up with this hobby of mine. I know it can be a little much at times. I spend a lot of time talking about it and thinking about it, and she deals with it. And I'm very appreciative of that. I love that she supports it and, you know, lets me do it without too much grief. So I love having my boys out here. I'm appreciative that I get to show this and share this with them. I'm thankful for my dad and my mom, you know, for giving me the opportunity to learn the things that I was able to, that I could then put into this, you know. My friends who have helped me, you know, on miscellaneous projects, Joe Hutchcraft for just countless ideas, and he's like my perfect sounding board. Shane Hatfield for my headlights and also for being a great sounding board. Matthew Clevenstein, Mike Martin, Rob Shoemate, Tyler Vargas for helping me. He's made countless shifters for me. My buddy Robert lives right down the road. He's come over and helped me in the garage a few times. ZZ Performance for sponsoring me. I am super grateful for them. I love everything they do. I love the team there, everybody there, from Ryan, Tyler, Trevor, Al. You guys are all great. I appreciate your support. Brom Racing for sponsoring me, for being the first sponsor of my car, and hooking me up with the 4 seats, the seat covers, the harness. Yeah, they definitely, Brom Racing looks out for me a lot. And obviously my own company, AH Did It, I have to give myself a little pat on the back, I guess. I did all of the, like the hand stitched leather in the car. I leather stitched all of the door handles, the e-brake, every little tray that had a plastic insert. I pulled the plastic insert out and custom cut and trimmed them in leather. I mean, the story that I have to tell with the car, you know, obviously I can't tell this story to every person in passing, but the story that I have for the car is super meaningful. You know, it got me through some rough times. You know, I spent a lot of time out in this garage by myself, thinking about my dad, thinking about life. And if this is the result of that, I'm pretty happy.